other in the chat, and I'm going to go through a couple of brief housekeeping items for the annual meeting today. A couple of quick notes and reminders. As you will be aware, we're recording this meeting and we'll be sharing the recording and the slides afterward. We do appreciate everyone being here today and hope that we can create a positive and respectful atmosphere for everyone. We do have a code of conduct, which we expect all of our participants to follow, and we will post that in the chat in a moment. You're welcome to be on camera or off camera, and you're welcome to speak up when we have a chance for questions and discussion. Please kindly remember to mute your audio when you're not speaking. A quick Zoom tip for anyone who may not know about this: you can enable captions in Zoom and set a speaking language if that helps to follow along with the content. And we're also here to have some fun and build community today and celebrate ROR's anniversary. So please have fun with Zoom reactions and chat. There will be some points throughout today where we'll ask you to share some reactions. And of course, all ROR themed backgrounds and emojis are very welcome and encouraged. So the plan for today is to celebrate 6 years of ROR and 6 years of the ROR community. And we want to share with all of you an update on what's going on with ROR right now, what we've been up to in the past year, and where we're going in the future. And this is also an opportunity to hear from you and to invite your ideas and input as we chart a course into 2025 and beyond. And quick reminder, this is the first kickoff session for ROR's anniversary celebration and annual community meeting. We have a few other sessions that are happening as part of this event, including an optional drop-in session right after this one if you want to hang around in Zoom and chat with the ROR team or anyone else who's there. And we have 2 more sessions tomorrow at different points throughout the day. One is a panel discussion focused on ROR and national research policies, and the other one is a panel discussion featuring different topics related to opportunities and challenges with ROR in the Asia Pacific region. We'll post those links. Amanda has already posted those links in the chat if you haven't yet registered for those sessions. We really hope to see you there. So that's the plan for today, and I wanted to start briefly by introducing myself and officially welcoming all of you here to this call today. I see a lot of familiar names and faces along with some new ones. For those I haven't met yet, I'm Maria Gould. I'm the director of ROR, and I'm really honored to kick off the session today with a few brief remarks about why are we here today, and then I'll turn things over to my colleagues on the ROR team, so you'll hear from all of them shortly in the course of the call. So why are we here today? We do community calls for ROR many times throughout the year, and this one is a little different. So I just wanted to take a moment and talk about what brings us here today. 6 years ago in 2019, we officially launched ROR at a public community meeting in Dublin, Ireland, the day before Pitapalooza. If you were there, you're welcome to put up a reaction or an emoji in chat. And one of the founding principles behind ROR was not just to be an open registry of identifiers, but also a community-driven one, meaning that ROR was meant to be developed for, by, and with the community. And that principle is still core to everything that we're doing today. So every year on the anniversary of ROR's launch, we come together to celebrate another year, to reflect on the past, and to look ahead to the future, and acknowledge all of you across the community that have made this progress possible. So that brings me to all of you and what brings you here today. So a few questions to ask, and building on the introductions people have been sharing in chat. I've already asked who of you on the call were around for ROR's community first launch in Dublin in 2019. So I'm going to ask a few more questions, and you're welcome to raise your hand or do a Zoom reaction or emoji. If anyone was around for some of the early discussions about ROR before ROR even existed, put an emoji in chat or raise your hand. Seeing some hands here. And raise your hand if you've been to any of ROR's annual meetings in prior years or other community calls throughout the year. Okay, more hands. This is great. And raise your hand if you've submitted any feedback to ROR about our technical development work or about registry additions and updates and metadata curation. Okay, lots of hands. So many hands. And raise your hand if your organization has contributed financially to support ROR's growth and sustainability over the years. Okay, thank you very much. And raise your hand if this is your first ever ROR meeting and you're just excited and happy to be here. Hopefully that should get everyone. And this is just a really great and positive illustration of the depth of the ROR community as it has grown over the years, and why everything that we do aims to be developed with this spirit and energy and collaboration in mind. So where are we now? I want to talk briefly about where ROR is today as we've reached this milestone of 6 years. And as I mentioned, we have a set of core principles around being open and being community driven. Those values and principles have not changed, will not change ever since we got started, but a lot has been changing over the years in terms of ROR's overall growth and reach. So since our initial launch back in 2019, that was really reflecting the culminating event of several years of community dialogue and collaboration leading up to that point that involved many organizations, many stakeholder groups to develop this initial vision for ROR and organize a small project team to take the work forward at that launch in 2019. And when ROR launched, we were able to offer kind of minimal viable product, an open data set, a public API as our initial offering with some seed data that had been donated from Grid. And we spent some time over the following couple of years after that launch refining our offering and our operating model in consultation with all of you and with many others not on this call to explore different pathways to growth and sustainability and different considerations around metadata curation over time and things like that. And it was the result of those efforts in those initial years in our so-called startup phase that led to the formalization of our current model, allowed us to implement an independent and community-based curation process, allowed us to grow the ROR team, to define our resourcing needs for the future, and to reach this point of relative maturity and stability, and also expansion. So as we reflect on the past 6 years and kind of think ahead to the future, we're really happy to be at this point where we've achieved a great deal of growth and stability, thanks to all of the work that all of you have put into helping us to get here. And we're continuing to engage with our community as we move into the future and think about what that holds. So what does that mean now in terms of what is our operating model? So for those of you who may be a little less familiar, I know there's some of you joining for your first time today. We're offering ROR as a free and open service. ROR is operated and governed according to a multi-year memorandum of agreement by 3 organizations. We're not an independent organization. We have a small dedicated team who you'll hear from shortly, based across all of ROR's 3 operating organizations. And that also allows ROR to have a kind of stable and baseline amount of resourcing and support with supplemental financial support from contributing organizations. And a lot of our operations also involve input from those of you on the call and those of you who are not on the call, who join our community calls, who participate in our curation advisory board and steering group, and help us to make decisions and chart our directions going forward. And all of this work is also guided by our alignment with the principles of open scholarly infrastructure, also known as POSI. And so, what is ROAR now as we approach 6 years in terms of our offering? I mentioned we launched ROAR in 2019 with a kind of basic initial offering of a core data set and a public API, and that largely remains true today. And it's something that we have refined further over the years. And so, a core part of our offering is the registry itself, our core data set of IDs and metadata for 110,000 organizations from all over the world, and continuing to grow as through our regular and ongoing curation process. And we also offer a small set of tools and services to allow users to engage with the registry data, such as our API and various services around matching affiliations to ROAR. And this, I sort of drew this to depict a little bit of a rainbow, that all of this work that we do to develop the registry, to build out our curation process, and to further develop our tools and services for retrieving and querying and matching ROAR data is developed through various community-driven processes. And this is driven by the need to support a core set of use cases that really drove ROAR's initial launch and continue to support what we're trying to do today. We remain laser focused on this core use case of being able to uniquely identify and disambiguate research organizations as well as funding organizations with a high quality, open, usable data set. And that supports various kinds of downstream needs and use cases around tracking and reporting of research, and also supporting overall goals around open science, open research, fair data. We really can't have any of that without open identifiers and open metadata associated with them. So we remain really closely tied to the initial vision for ROAR to support a community-driven open solution for identifying organizations. And we've continued to evolve and adapt the various and many use cases that we can support as the research community has evolved alongside. So this kind of concludes my opening remarks today, and I just want to close with a brief note of thanks to all of you for participating in ROAR community activities over the years in many ways, whether that has been joining calls, advising on registry updates, supporting our technical development, building your own technical implementations, talking about ROAR to your friends and colleagues, including ROAR in various policies and guidelines, and supporting our sustainability, and overall just being very supportive and active and engaged members of the community. And as part of that, I just want to especially acknowledge our generous financial supporters who have helped to help ROAR to achieve its sustainability goals over the past years and continue to invest in our growth and success. Too many of you to call out individually right now, but I just wanted to make sure to end on that note of thanks. And on that, I will pass over to my colleague, Adam and Riley.
Yeah, hi everyone. Adam Buttrick, product manager for ROAR here to talk about maintaining ROAR data. So the story of ROAR data is and will hopefully forever be one of continued growth, continued engagement, and continuous improvement. So nowhere is this more obvious than in our incredibly active curation service, where we processed over 8,000 curation requests in 2024, 44% increase over the prior year. This work resulted in us adding over 4,000 new records to the registry and updating approximately 107,000. Independent of our own improvement efforts, we also saw quite large kind of organic curation requests and activity from many countries around the world, with Mexico, Indonesia, and France topping the charts. So recognizing the importance of scaling our capacity to meet this kind of new demand, we added two actually really brilliant new curation board members, Jackson Wang from the Educopia Institute and Carol Melzak from the Higher Education Bibliographic Agency in France. They've been absolutely fantastic additions to this body, working alongside all of our really amazing members of the curation board to help us tackle all of those really thorny curation issues we encounter. As Maria said, we've been at this for 6 years, and I feel like we still can come up with new problems and new challenges that we have to navigate. So having all of those folks here to help us do that is just an unbelievable resource, and we can't express enough gratitude to them. The ROR team was also very fortunate to be joined by our new metadata curation manager, the wonderful, talented Riley Marsh, who many of you I'm sure have already been working with and you'll be hearing from in just a moment. It's only been about 6 months, but we can't imagine having worked without her. With this expanded team in place, we also turned our attention to improving kind of the technical aspects of our curation infrastructure. So this actually led us to undertake a kind of top to bottom rewrite of our curation code base, making it better, faster, and more well documented. This has really streamlined a lot of our release process and also uncovered some opportunities to kind of optimize the data pipeline overall. Okay, so I'm going to turn things over to Riley.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Adam, for that awesome introduction earlier. So much of our work in 2024 was also focused on leveraging all of the great new metadata fields that we added in schema version 2. After its release, we kicked things off by doing language tagging of name metadata across the entire data set, taking our coverage into the 90% range for both primary and variant names, excluding company records. And this was followed by leveraging domain data from many sources, including Edugain, ORCID, and some user-submitted data to add these values to over 8,000 records. And as part of this work, we also did bulk improvements, link metadata, fixing broken or errant links for thousands of records. And in addition to support schema v2, we added funder types for all records with cross-ref funder IDs, in addition to those for many new independently created funder records, as well as updated and rationalized all of our location data. So we're bringing all the records in the data set up to date with the most recent location data in the GeoNames service, for which these values are derived. And I'm turning it back over to Adam.
Thank you, Riley. So looking ahead to 2025, we have a few key areas we'll be focused on. First up, we have some regionally focused improvement efforts with work kind of already underway in Portugal and Japan. If you paid really close attention to our last release, you saw we added about 1,200 new records for Japanese research organizations. To support these efforts and acknowledge all the other great identifier work being done around the world, we'll also be looking at integrating new external identifiers into ROR. So thanks to all of those who have submitted kind of requests for these to be added, as well as your patience while we kind of do the due diligence and work through the process of supporting. In 2025, we'll also be paying attention to improving our coverage for funders, society, and publishing organizations. Work on that first one has been underway for some time, but is now getting additional attention as we pursue the funder registries deprecation and kind of replacement with ROR. So for society and publishing organizations, we've actually received some really great feedback and in-depth analysis from our users and ROR integrators on kind of improving our coverage in these areas, which we're going to look at tackling. Last but not least, we'll be looking at continuing to improve our domain coverage using data from all of those great sources that Riley mentioned, as well as pursuing those curation data pipeline improvements that we uncovered as part of our kind of curation code base rewrite. Okay, so that's all for me. I spent a lot of time talking about work that we've been doing, but I also just kind of want to pause here to say, that we couldn't do any of this without you. Nowhere is that more obvious in the curation work that we do. All of your curation requests, your feedback, your participation in calls like these. No one is more attuned to the fact that ROR data is really just the ROR community in action. That's what makes us strong, and that's what makes us so proud to be able to, be here working with all of you on this project. So also before I turn things over to Liz, I just want to pause here for any questions about maintaining ROR data. I saw we had one in the chat actually, which I'll address, which is what kind of curation requests are the most common and which are the hardest to resolve? Yeah, so most common are, kind of very basic metadata corrections that you would think about. Like an organization's name has changed, a website needs to be updated. There's an additional variant name that should be added, those kind of things. Also just straightforward requests for new records that are not present in ROR. Thorniest curation challenges to tackle are probably where there are national or maybe even institutional or domain kind of focused specificities that we have to kind of untangle, really kind of in consultation or discussion with the whole curation board. Sometimes reaching out to other folks, that are kind of in our network or network of networks, meaning Crossref, CDL, and DataSite, to get a better perspective on. So there's no shortage of those. So we have a monthly meeting to talk through, and we always have some great discussion topics to kind of untangle. Any other questions about curation or maintaining more data?
Adam, there is one more that's been answered, but
Sure.
just as a reminder for everyone. So what do we do if an organization does not have a ROR ID?
Oh, yes. So go to curation-request.roar.org, put in all of those lovely details about your organization, and we'll look at adding it in 2 to 4 weeks. We have a pretty straightforward form that you just fill out. You'll get a GitHub issue in response to that message to track it. You can also actually go directly into ROR-updates repo and create an issue there if you'd like to. That latter one does require you create a GitHub account, but those are free to create.
All right, I think that's it. So on to me.
Okay. Yes, I'll turn things over to Liz now.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Krasnarich. I am the technical lead and lead developer for ROR, and I'm here to give you a bit of an update on what we've been working on over 2024 and what we're planning for 2025. So we've had a pretty exciting year in 2024. We launched our first major schema update in March of 2024. And for those who are new to the ROR community, for background, we inherited our data structure, our schema, initially from Grid. So Grid provided the seed data, the initial records for ROR, which means that we inherited not only the data, but the data structure. They eventually sunset their public offering and handed things over to ROR. And as we kind of learned through the curation process over the first couple of years, there were things that we wanted to change with the schema, both to fulfill external needs, requests we were hearing from the community, and to make the curation process a bit easier internally, and to prepare us for the future, to make the record schema more extensible and flexible to support future needs that we might not quite know about yet. So March 2024, we launched a new schema as well as API updates for that schema and a new API version. There were a lot of changes to this schema, and what we anticipated was making one big set of changes for V2 and hopefully not touching it too much in a really dramatic way in the near future. So we did a lot of reorganization of things like the names fields to make them more standardized. We changed up the locations field and the external IDs field to make everything more consistent and more flexible. We also added some administrative information, like created and last modified dates. We added domains, as Riley mentioned, and populated that with data. We added a lot of language support to all the name fields, as Riley mentioned, to fulfill some of the requests we were hearing from the community, and this new organization type of funders. In terms of the API, we have added versioning into the API. And with those new fields, we have some new filters. So you can now filter organizations by type, funder, and then you can search in our advanced search based on some of the newer fields. So all this was done with multiple rounds of community feedback on the schema version 2. However, after we launched it, a few months later, it became pretty clear that in changing up the locations field, we needed to do a little bit of work on that to better support users. So we did a quick little schema version 2.1 update in November, and that in the API just went right into the production V2 API, even though it is a minor schema version change. But per our version policy, we kind of fast track minor version non-breaking changes right into the major schema version. The upshot of all that is that we added back country subdivision information, and we also added continent information. So it's now possible to to search and filter by continent as well, which is a feature we didn't have in V1. So that is all up and available in V2. And as we look at API usage, I put here just a snapshot of a month in the life of the ROR API. So how are we doing as far as what our API usage looks like and the two versions? So we can see we have in the past month about 13 million API requests. In terms of adoption of the version 2, we see about a third of our requests are in version 2. A handful are specifically version 1, but the bulk are still coming in with no version because we didn't require specifying a version of the API previously. And our default version is currently version 1. So 9 million requests are coming back in version 1. Up at the top here, you can see how it breaks down as to what kinds of requests we get. So we get a large number of requests for our affiliation matching service, which is not surprising. So folks looking to match messy strings to a ROR identifier, followed up by requests for individual records and then other types of queries. So in looking at our API usage, one of the projects that we started working on in 2024 to address some of the usage patterns we see is adding client ID registration and doing a little bit of rate limiting based on those client identifiers. So as you'll see in, or as you did see in the previous slide, I mean, our usage isn't huge heavy, but for a very small organization, it's pretty consistent and pretty consistently high all day long, which means when we get spikes of usage that's not such a nice usage pattern, it can really cause some challenges for other users who are relying on ROR. So for example, we've seen increased instances of multiple instances of the same application hitting the ROR API from multiple IP addresses over a period of a couple of hours or days. And it's very difficult for us to address that behavior, or we see cases where folks are sending requests that generate errors, and there's probably a better way to format the requests. So we would love to be able to help people use the API better and also to get a better handle on some of the traffic management so we can maintain a well-functioning API for all users. So back in September, October 2024, we put out a draft proposal to introduce client identification into the API. So we don't require any registration for using the API currently. It's all basically unidentified traffic, which can be challenging for us. So with this proposal, we are not trying to limit access to certain resources in the API. We're not creating tiers of membership. We're not trying to, this is not about paid services. We just want to have a little bit more information to be able to manage traffic in the API. So we got some community feedback on a proposal, put together a final proposal in November of 2024. And the outcome of that is that we are currently building a client ID registration process. It's a very, very simple form and asking users to include a client ID as a header along with their requests to the API. We plan to launch that and make that available for beta at the end of the first quarter and in a production way in the middle of the year. And then by the beginning of 2026, we are actually going to implement some rate limiting based on the presence or absence of a valid client ID. So we're trying to keep this very lightweight, but just allow us to manage that API traffic a little better and position us in a healthy way for scaling in the future. So that said, on to 2025 projects. We are already underway with some of those, including the client ID and rate limiting. But for right now, another project that we've been working on is some additional affiliation matching improvements. If you're keeping up to date on ROR news and the ROR blog, you may have noticed we've had a series of blog posts, primarily led by Adam, on some work that Crossref has done over the past couple of years around matching and specifically improving matching approaches for organizations to ROR IDs. OpenAlex actually implemented some of this work recently, and we have been doing work to implement some of these improvements over the last couple of months. So our goal is to make affiliation matching not only better in terms of results, but to improve the performance and response time, because right now it is really a resource hog and is one of the things that can bog down API performance quite a bit when there are lots of users sending lots of requests to the API endpoint. So I've been working on those changes and a lot of testing recently, and we are planning to make a beta available around the end of Q1 for testing, and then we'll communicate a release timeline for that. We're not going to just switch over the affiliation endpoint without any warning. So related API performance improvements that are not very fascinating or exciting to the rest of the world, but we're also working on some response caching to speed up response time, and also to free up some resources to keep the API healthy for all of our users. And then that client ID and rate limiting implementation that I mentioned available in Q1, Q2, and then we will actually start applying rate limiting based on client identifier in the beginning of 2026. So finally, we come to those schema and API versions. We worked with the community to develop a API versioning policy that included our kind of commitment and contract with the community around sunsetting versions, just to communicate that we're not going to pull the rug out from anyone. We included in our schema versioning that we'll give at least a year period before we sunset a previous major version. So we released version 2 back in March of 2024, which means we are coming up on a year of schema version 2. Because this is our first version, we're giving a bit of extra time, but we do plan to sunset version 1 at the end of 2025. This is a multi-phase process. So currently version 1, if you don't send us a specific version number with your API requests, you will get a response back in version 1. That means we're curating records in both versions. Essentially, we're maintaining both versions at this point. In July, we will switch that default to version 2. So version 1 will still be available if you specifically include in your API request URL version 1. Otherwise, you'll get version 2. And then at the end of 2025, we will actually remove support for version 1, and all responses will be in version 2, and V1 will no longer be available. So we are hoping that that timeline allows plenty of time for users to update. And we also, our goal is to align that client ID registration and rate limiting launch date with the schema V1 sunset date. So if you're doing work on ROR integration, you can get in there and do both parts at the same time. So that's it on projects, but I do want to give a big thank you to the ROR community for your input. So each and every technical project of any size that we undertake begins with a proposal, typically that is shared publicly for community feedback. And we really rely on that feedback to make good decisions, to support community use cases, and really think through how we want to build features and services to support your needs now and in the future. So it's not just whatever is falling out of our own heads at a given moment. And that is really critical to our success. So thanks to everybody who's contributed, and I hope for the folks who are new, we'll be able to have your input on those proposals we'll develop in the future. So thank you. And now I will turn it over to Amanda unless there are any questions.
I saw a
But
couple of
technical
questions in the chat. I think Adam was addressing them. And then there's one from Simon. Does ROR exclusively aim to reflect the currently existing organizations? Are all the updates dependent on human curation, or do you have automated processes?
I'll have to
Adam?
flip that over to Adam.
Yeah.
The answer to the question is anything that is human submitted is generally required to be processed through some form of a human curation manual intervention, only because we have to assess the correctness of the request. So there can be very basic or simple things that, such as a ROR ID in a request not corresponding to the actual details of the organization, or values being, not present that kind of require that kind of high touch approach. There's a lot of work that we do that's actually at the level of a full scale kind of data improvements or kind of correction. So the kind of things that Riley was talking about that we do with domains, our language tagging, that's all done via various forms of, kind of automated intervention across the entire data set. So yeah, if it comes from a person, the person handles it. If there are improvements that we identify that need to be made from different data sources, from just kind of something that's exposed relative to API behavior, then we just go ahead and do those ourselves.
Any other questions about the ROR API in particular? All right. Well, I will talk to you a little bit now about who's using ROR and how and why. So my name is Amanda French. I am the Technical Community Manager for ROR. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about ROR adoption right now, including highlights from 2024, and also tell you what's ahead in 2025. Some services have customers. ROR has fans. I think we have several ROR fans on the call right now. You know who you are. We know who you are for sure, and we're very grateful for you. The more I talk to people who are using ROR, and that's a large part of my role, or even many people who've heard of ROR and are planning or hoping to use it, the more I hear praise for how easy ROR is to implement, appreciation for ROR's community curation model, and transparent process for inviting comments on proposed schema and API changes. And above all, what I hear is gratitude for ROR's very existence. ROR is the only open institution identifier for research organizations, and that is filling a very real need. If ROR didn't already exist, we would have to begin inventing it now. So some highlights about ROR users or ROR adopters or ROR integrations from 2024. ROR adoption continues to grow among all kinds of systems and all kinds of users for all kinds of use cases. We see ROR being incorporated into large indexes of scholarly research. We see ROR in repository systems. We see ROR in publishing and peer review systems, and a lot more, things that we couldn't even have imagined. Users of ROR include publishers, librarians, funders, infrastructure providers, national and institutional research offices, researchers, individual researchers, and data scientists. ROR users are using ROR to enable better discovery of research, to track research activities by creator affiliation or by funder, to analyze research activities, to ensure compliance with policies, to clean and normalize metadata, to save money and time by streamlining workflows, and in general, to make better connections between research outputs and research organizations. So what are the main ways that we track adoption of ROR? One of the main ways is you tell us that you're using ROR. So if you are using ROR and we don't know, we're always happy to hear about that. Put something in the chat, email us at support@ror.org, anything. If you're using ROR, we would love to know about it. But one of the other ways that we track this is by tracking the use of ROR IDs in Crossref and DataCite DOI metadata. And more recently, we've been looking at ROR and ORCID as well. So these charts are meant to give you just a high-level view of the increase in ROR IDs in these systems over time. We won't go into the specific statistics right now. Perhaps one of my colleagues can share a link to where you can find these charts and the spreadsheets. They're all open. You can dig into them more. But as you can see, the general trend is decidedly upward. So just a couple of little points that I wanted to make is that the number of Crossref records with ROR IDs has more than doubled in the last year, up to over 178,000 from last year's figure of 81,000. So that's great. The number of data site records with ROR IDs is 10 times larger than it was last year, up to 14.8 million from about 1.48 million at this time last year. And that's thanks in large part to Japan's National Institute for Fusion Science, which had deposited tens of thousands of records with excellent metadata, including ROR IDs. The growth in ORCID records with ROR IDs has also more than doubled over the last year, thanks mainly to work by ORCID's product team to encourage the use of ROR for researcher affiliations and other organizations in ORCID. And so that number is now up to over 3.7 million from less than 1.5 million since we first started tracking this, which was actually in April 2024. So it's not even a whole year that the number of ROR IDs in ORCID has doubled. And so those are the top three charts on this slide. The bottom three charts on this slide are some slightly different things. The bottom left one is indicating item types with ROR IDs in Crossref metadata. So over 40% of those are journal articles, DOIs for journal articles that use ROR IDs for author affiliations. American Physical Society is a large contributor to this statistic, we know. Plenty of other publishers are doing this as well. The next largest category is grants, reflecting the increased use of ROR for funder identification, as well as like the affiliation of the principal investigator. So grants are another very large item type in Crossref that makes use of ROR IDs. That central bottom chart is data site records that include some kind of contributor or creator affiliation. And so of the data site records that have an identifier for those, which is quite a few, more than 98% of them are using ROR. A few of them are still using GRID, a few of them are using ISNI, but ROR is overwhelmingly the identifier of choice for contributor and creator affiliation identifiers in DataSite. And then finally, that last bottom right chart shows ROR in ORCID records. And so at this point, ROR is teal there. Nearly 48% of the records in ORCID that use an identifier for a researcher affiliation use a ROR ID for that purpose. And that's probably going to be much closer to 100% by the end of 2025, because ORCID's product team is doing a lot of work both to encourage ROR IDs for this purpose and to manually add it and reconcile it themselves. So we're very much looking forward to that. We know already of several important planned implementations of ROR that are coming in 2025. Crossref, any minute now, literally any minute now, any day now, any hour now, is very much on the verge of releasing the ability to accept ROR IDs for funder identifiers. That's coming daily. In fact, the code is all done. They're adding some documentation, doing a little bit of testing, writing an announcement, and so on, but that is coming in the blink of an eye. Another one that I'm very excited about is Adipon, which, as some of you may know, is a sort of a publishing platform that's very widely used. And they've given me permission to say that, yes, indeed, they are working on enabling their customers to submit ROR IDs in Crossref metadata. And they're hoping to have that done by the end of this quarter. It may be a little bit later, but it could be as soon as next month. So that's going to be very exciting. The new version of Open Journal Systems coming out this year, version 3.5, will also have ROR built in for author affiliations. Right now, you can use it in a plugin, but it's going to drastically increase use of ROR for people who use that newer version of OJS this year. These are our areas of primary focus for encouraging ROR adoption in 2025. First of all, we want to support, encourage, and promote and support. I already said support, but supporting is important, but also promoting that use of ROR IDs for funder identifiers. We also want to make sure that ROR is included in guidance, standards, and reporting at the international, national, and institutional level. We want to make it even easier for ROR supporters to help advocate for ROR. We have some folks on here who have helped translate ROR outreach materials into different languages. That's something we'd like to concentrate on a bit more of, and just in general, providing materials that you can use to help convey the importance of ROR to your colleagues. And And then the final thing that we're going to do is just continue supporting current ROR users and reaching out to new ROR users and potential new ROR users. And we would also love to hear your thoughts on areas of focus for ROR adoption in 2025. So I'd like to close by thanking all the members of the ROR community who contributed to the ROR blog in 2024. Again, I see many of you here. I see you, Arthur. I think I saw Rebecca here. These are folks who have helped contribute to case studies, to announcements of ROR adoption, and even to explainers about how ROR works, especially in relationship to other identifiers. And I'd like to also thank those who presented their uses of ROR at our community calls or helped us organize standalone sessions about ROR and affiliation data. So any questions or comments about ROR adoption before we move on? I see a few things in the chat. I don't know if they're out about John Lewis from Cambridge. ROR ID mentioned in relation to the metadata stat, is there any analysis on whether the full URL is being used in all cases or whether it is being used without the HTTPS prefix? Is the ROR ID always the full ROR? Liz, were you thinking about?
I was typing an answer to that. I can say that the canonical form of the ROR identifier is the full URL with the HTTPS protocol. And we've established that from early on. So our hope is that primarily it's the full URL. I know that in practice, this isn't always the case in all schemas. For the sake of these statistics, Amanda, I don't remember what the
I don't know either. So a couple of things. I do not know of analysis that has been done about that. That's the first thing. Two, I don't know, I cannot remember and should know whether, for instance, Crossref requires a particular form of the ROR ID and whether DataCite requires a particular form of the ROR ID.
I can say that DataCite does
know
not.
That.
However, so for the sake of those stats from the DataCite side, DataCite does require a scheme and a scheme URI, so that makes it easier to pick out the ROR, the affiliations that have ROR IDs in DataCite. So for the sake of that data analysis, I can say that all the DataCite ones are kind of independent of what the actual form of the ROR identifier is in the DataCite metadata, because we can get that from.
Say that again. Like in DataCite records, are ROR IDs always a URL?
No, but DataCite, because of the requirements of the schema, requires you to include information about what the identifier is.
Right.
It's in
scheme type ROR.
I mean, it's preferable that the identifier can self-identify, which is why we recommend the full URL, because then in schemas that don't have attributes that require you to identify what type of identifier this is, it can still be resolved and you can tell what it is.
The other important thing that I would say about this is that all of those forms resolve against the ROR API. So you don't have to put it, you can put the HTTPS in, you can leave it off. You can leave off the ROR.org and only use the identifier. And if you're throwing those against the ROR API, the API will understand any of those. In terms of analysis as to what form people are actually using in their metadata, I have to say I have seen it in all of those ways. I just can't remember where exactly I've seen which uses of those. I look at that all the time. So I think that could bear further analysis, and that would be an interesting line of inquiry.
Thank you. Thank you for answering it so thoroughly.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm asking really is just obviously Cambridge is quite a big publishing organization, and we have a debate all the time about whether to use the full URL or not. So when we are attaching the ROR to the metadata for published articles, we do use the full URL. And then but for some internal processes, we don't always use it. And so there is a debate going on about aligning all of our processes to just use the full, and exactly why we are not using the full, really. So that's an ongoing conversation. And yeah, so I just wondered whether there was a sense in the community of, are people, even when they're publishing articles and sending that data to external sources, whether they are sort of using the full URL or not, really. Yeah, so it was just an interesting.
Well, and I've had a couple of responses from people in Crossref, and again, it's kind of surprising that I didn't know this offhand. I think I've probably seen it, but both Martin Rittman and Shane Smulyan have said that for the affiliations in Crossref, they do all require that HTTPS prefix. And then Martin also says that you'll add it if it wasn't in the input. So presumably you would know it was a ROR ID. So in Crossref, presumably those all do have the HTTPS. And I think, in our documentation, which I know I sent you, John, and I could put a link in here. We when I'm coding, that stuff is really annoying to escape. I admit it. But when you have a full URL in the metadata, it means it can resolve a bit easier than just a
Yeah, and this is across the PID, the persistent identifier landscape, and not just specific to ROR, because when you're working with things like DOI records that are already abstractions of some other metadata source, it may get shared and translated to other metadata formats that may not identify what the identifier is. So as a general rule of thumb, it's always better if you can make persistent identifiers self-resolvable essentially and self-identifiable, because this aggregated metadata may get exchanged into other formats that strip out some of the detail that a record may have initially had about what this type of persistent ID is.
Anyway, that's kind of a lot of time on a relatively small issue, but we're always happy to talk about that more, but I do want to move on because we've only got a few more minutes, and we do actually want to hear more from you. I see a great piece of news from Tony Alvis in the chat that the new submission system is using ROR, so I'm thrilled to hear that, but we'd love to hear from you. Just take literally 1 minute and tell us in the chat what you plan to do with ROR in 2025. We would love to hear more about that. I also know too, sometimes when I do these presentations, it's not, adopting ROR is not just an either or thing. It's not just a binary. You adopt it and then you're done. Most people are using ROR to improve features in their software. They're refining their approach, even as you were talking about, John Lewis, having debates about, exactly what form of the ROR to use. People, when people have adopted ROR, they're continuing to make changes to that. So we'd love to hear about those, as well as any new uses of ROR. Yep, integrating ROR as a funder ID, updating to schema 2.1. It's not an either ROR thing. Thank you, Vida. Oh. Trophy for that. Promoting ROR. Thank you, Fauji. Integrate ROR in academic journals, portals. Fantastic. Janeway. I know ROR has been on the Janeway roadmap for a little bit, so we're happy to do that. Happy to see that. Oh, fantastic. ROR for data sets. All good news. Okay, feel free to continue to add those. But we had we wanted to give you at least a little bit of a chance to just say or ask anything else about ROR. Anything we haven't addressed that you'd like us to address in the last few minutes?
Lots of great activities and plans here.
This makes me very glad that we can save the chat. Have lots of folks to follow up with afterward. All right. Well, if there's nothing else you want to say or ask about ROR, Maria, maybe I will pass it over to
Well,
you.
I have one final thing to ask as we bring this to a close. Before I do that, I just want to remind everyone, stick around on Zoom after this if you'd like to chat informally. And I want to ask and check with all of you with a invitation to go on camera if you'd like for this final closing and unmute if possible. Are you all ready to roar with us in 2025? So if you are, take a moment to raise your arm, raise your right arm or your left, doesn't matter. Then raise your other arm, hold them up, wiggle your fingers so we can see them. Okay. Now make them into your best lion paw that you can. You're looking great, everyone. Nobody looks silly at all. Okay. And you're welcome to be doing this off camera too. Okay, and on the count of three, we are all going to do our very, very best 2025 roar to kick off this new year. So I hope you're all unmuting for this part. 1, 2, 3, roar! All right, you all sounded and looked terrific. Thank you all very much for joining us today, for joining us over the past 6 years. And thank you in advance for joining us into the future as we continue to build and do and engage in all of these exciting and important activities together. So really couldn't do it without all of you and your support and interest and enthusiasm. Please get in touch, keep roaring. We love to talk with you. We love to hear from you. We want to hear from you and do more things with you. So thank you again. Have a wonderful day and join us right after this and join us tomorrow if you'd like to do more in the next couple days.